Thank you very much, Nuria, and it's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon, and thank you for bearing with us. I think we've gone from perhaps the Charlie's Angels of development finance to mum power on the panel this afternoon. So it's great to be among old friends and also to meet new faces as well. So part of my presentation this afternoon is based on a paper that I drafted earlier this year with Jonathan Glennie, my partner in crime, who many of you know. And the paper is entitled Where Next for Aid? The Post-2015 Opportunity. And my starting point, or our starting point, is basically that we need a radically different and much broader appreciation of international public finance and what it can achieve in the post-2015 era. But before I explain why and how, let me make 3 observations about international public finance. The first is that although international cooperation is underfunded, international public finance is on the rise. The number of countries which are now contributing international public finance, concessional and non-concessional finance, has increased and continues to increase, and the number of financial instruments and collaborations that those countries are using has become more diverse and sophisticated over recent years. And those are trends that are likely to continue in the post-2015 era. So international public finance is on a steady rise. Second, that contrary to public perceptions, international public finance continues to undergo a vibrant process of innovation and change. Innovations, on the one hand, in the types of financial instruments used. So, for instance, one example would be the International Finance Facility for Immunization, which allows for a scaling up of contributions now and a paying down of those aid obligations later. And secondly, innovations in collaborative arrangements and in institutional arrangements. The international development landscape is no longer the preserve of governments and intergovernmental entities, and the entrance of new actors in the development landscape has expanded opportunities for innovations in how we use international public finance. And many of the recent innovations that we've seen in how we use international public finance have involved public-private partnerships. So examples would be the Gavi Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization and weather-related insurance. Third, I think that we still often think about international public finance, and especially development aid, as a residual gap filler. So it makes up shortfalls in countries' budgets until other sources of finance become available, domestic and external, or until countries are able to sort of stand on their own 2 feet. And yes, that's definitely one important function for international public finance. But in our paper, we also point to so many important roles for international public finance. So, for instance, the counter-cyclical function it can play, the fact that it can fund long-term and riskier interventions, which may be more difficult with domestic budgets, can invest in research, it can leverage private sector finance, and they're just a few. But I think that ODI was right in its framing paper for this conference to point to the fact that often the political economy considerations in donor countries mean that sometimes international public finance is not as effective as it could be, that is compromised. But those challenges, in turn, have also given rise to innovations in the way we try to address some of those effectiveness challenges. So one innovation over recent years is the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, for instance. So those 3 observations about international public finance to one side. Let me turn now to what I believe international public finance needs to do in the post-2015 era. And I think that in many ways we need a conceptual shift in terms of how we conceive and think of international public finance. I think to some extent we're still very much in an MDGs sort of mind shift. We still tend to see aid as something temporary. It fills residual gaps. There's an end game in sight where aid is expected to stop. And I think the SDGs, in contrast, require us to have a very different appreciation of international public finance. The SDGs are only partially about traditional development. They're also, and I think this is the big change, the SDGs are also about transforming economies at all income levels so that the Earth's natural limits are respected. So they're about structural transformations in economies at all income levels. And we argue in our paper that international public finance has a crucial role to play in underpinning that structural transformation towards more sustainable economies in countries at all income level. So that's not necessarily aid as we traditionally understand it, although an important role for traditional development aid will continue in the post-2015 era. But we need to recognize that there are so many more important roles for international public finance in the post-2015 era, including but extending far beyond development aid. And many of those roles for international public finance in the post-2015 era imply a role for international public finance over the long term. So, for instance, we argue that we need to scale up dramatically investments and international public finance in research, science, innovation, and new technologies. We need to scale up international public finance in protecting the oceans, forests, biodiversity. We need to dramatically scale up international public finance in climate change mitigation and adaptation. These are all areas that the private sector tends to underfund for a variety of reasons. And yes, it's true that we already do invest and use international public finance in these areas already. What I'm arguing is that we tend to call that aid. And in some circumstances, that label can be misleading. Now, of course, if we step up international public finance for some of these areas in research, science, new technologies, and so on, in preservation of the environment, this has major implications for where we spend the money in the future and the types of financing modalities that we employ that will be the most effective to deliver. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the focus will be on the poorest countries. So, for instance, if we do scale up finance in climate change mitigation and adaptation, it is likely that it is larger, more populous, middle-income countries that will reap the benefits. It's more bang for your buck, so to speak. If we scale up investments in research, science, and so on, this may imply more national level expenditures on international concerns. So one important question, therefore, is it actually appropriate to use aid budgets to fund many of these areas? And if we do use aid budgets to fund some of those areas, as is current practice for some of them, some countries will lose out. There will be winners and there will be losers as the focus of international public finance involves. In terms of the financial modalities for international public finance that will be more effective for delivering funding in some of the areas I've just outlined, I mean specifically large-scale pooled disbursement mechanisms will be more effective rather than multiple small fragmented bilateral programs. Large pooled arrangements can allow for the building of expertise, economies of scale, enable the private sector, enable us to leverage resources from the private sector more efficiently and more effectively. But changes, however, in that direction so far have proven quite difficult. And in many ways, what we see at the moment is very much a proliferation of bilateral aid programs, and a large proportion of aid is still, and international public finance is delivered via bilateral programs. And in many ways, it's a badge of honor these days to open your own aid program. Of course, so I think, in conclusion, I think my argument is basically that we need a much broader appreciation of what international public finance can and should achieve in the post-2015 era. It includes but goes beyond aid, and so I think we need to shift our mindset basically accordingly. It's about how states collaborate at the international level to address shared concerns in the future, and I think that the post-2015 process and the Financing for Development conference, which will come up in Addis Ababa next year, provide an important opportunity for us to reflect on how we can improve international financial cooperation. So it's not just about seeing international public finance as a residual gap filler. That's important, yes. But it's much more than that. It's a permanent feature of the international landscape with the potential to drive forward progress and addressing major international challenges in the future. But I suppose, one of my questions is thinking about, well, what incentives are there to the international community to make changes, real, fundamental changes in how we do the business of aid in the post-2015 era. So I'll stop there. Just some thoughts for reflection. Thank you.